esters. The whole world knows Agent Orange as 5050 2,4-D 2,4,5-T. Moving on down, Stantox 2,4,5-T double strength, 3.6 pounds 2,4,5-T per gallon as an ester. This amounted to Agent White. All these Tordon 2G, 50D, and 75T Tordon and Tordon brush killers are with the picloram. This is Agent White and Agent Blue. These are military-grade chemicals, first used to kill Jewish people, and now being used to kill weeds because some people got too fat and lazy to bend over. But what this does is wind up in your reef and in your food chain. It's not in New Zealand, it's here too. Weed don't ester. All these things have taken on a new name, glyphosate. A common one I see here used on Maui is a Garlon 4, and if you look at the label, it clearly says trichlorophenol. There is no way to manufacture this without making radiomimetic dioxin, and recent samples taken from agricultural chemical stores open to the public in Canada show 3,000 times the allowable levels of dioxin in the stuff sold on the shelf. Most pertinent to the people of Hawaii, and would be to the Hawaiians, is a report I discovered here. This is a 6-volume report I intercepted. This is one of 10 that went to print. This report was not headed from the New Zealand government to the Crown in England. They're a Crown, they're a Commonwealth country. This report should have been headed for the Ministry of Health in England, and it was headed for the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. Mostly because Dow, the liability will fall back on the U.S. government for them allowing their behavior, and consequently the American people. This is an evaluation of the toxicities of dioxin and dioxin like PCBs, and New Zealand, a health risk appraisal for the New Zealand population. Concentration of PCBs and PCDDs in the dietary food intake for New Zealanders. Ambient concentrations of selected organic chlorines in soils. This is pertinent to us with our cane fields and pineapple fields, that the soil be rendered toxic for years with these chemicals. Ambient concentrations of selected organic chlorines in estuaries. This is where the mau and anything else at the river mouth get poisoned, and anyone that eats them. This is the ambient concentration of selected organic chlorines in the air. And what you don't realize is when they drive down the road and spray all the weeds with weed killer and all those weeds die, they turn into a particle and eventually into a dust that you turn on breathing that's caked in weed killers and dioxins as you drive down the road. New Zealand has a great many rivers. They have a large concentration of dioxin throughout them. But most important to Maui and Hawaii and the Hawaiian people is the concentration of selected organic chlorines in the serum of non-occupationally exposed New Zealand population, and what this report uncovered. Specifically, this is a picture of the dioxin molecule, the dibenzofuran. These are a list of the PCDs and the possible co-generators, and the number of possible 2,3,7. This all gets highly technical. We'll avoid that end of it. But what this report shows concentrations of PCDDs and PCDDFs. This is the spent form of the TCDD in non-Maori, age 65 years and older. What these reports showed is that between 1958 and 1963, the Maori of the South Island and New Zealand ceased to exist due to birth defects and cancer. We have a modern-day genocide from a chemical company here right amongst our midst. You will not find any Maori from the South Island of New Zealand. Not one. They can confirm this. The end result of this report being intercepted was a follow-up report some months later on New Zealand's plan for a pesticides reduction plan. They plan to reduce pesticides over the next 10 or 20 years. One would think after you'd wiped out an entire iwi and hapu, basically a whole generation of people with chemicals, you'd stop doing it immediately, but they have a plan to curtail their pesticide use over 10 years. In the dump investigation, their ESR, that's their Environmental Science Solutions company, they did a new Plymouth Community Dioxin Exposure Assessment Study. What their ESR, this is their lab that works for the police, investigates murder and whatnot, suggested was the immediate closure of the Dow Agrosciences plant, soil sterilization, or evacuation of residential areas in proximity to the IDW site. The police and their investigative branch, who investigate murders, said get everyone out of there, and the Prime Minister, on behalf of the Dow Chemical Company, overrode all of this in a $500,000 soil sample and said, you people stay put. Don't you think the same thing's going to happen here on Maui? I have for you an example of the technique they use. It's called shareholding. These are some of Dow's files from their internal company files, from their file cabinet. What they do is they go through your local society, your country, community, and they go around giving people large quantities of type A ordinary shares. Each one of these individuals that's highlighted has something to do with a regulatory position or some sort of position in the healthcare field. Or, here's another common tactic, CPDS Superannuation Investments Limited. CPD Superannuation Investments Limited, some box number, Wellington. This 700 shares to this investment something, this blasé, this is how they nameless, faceless invest in someone. Those 700 shares went to someone who cannot have their identity known. So we'll use a phony company name. Monsanto would be doing the same right now with Victorino and Molina and all these people down in your local council. They're becoming extravagantly wealthy, but you're not able to chase down how that's done. And the funny thing is, I just saw it. This is a typical return of allotments. It was formed in New Zealand in 1944. It was the fourth company formed in New Zealand in 1944. This is the 8th of August, 1978. Dow Chemical Company Agricultural. They keep their money at Bachtoebelstrasse 3, Horgen, Switzerland. Why don't Mr. Rumsfeld and Mr. Perlak and Mr. Cheney and all these people have enough confidence in their own economy to keep their own money in their own country? Or is this a good way to hide things? So now, one thing I would like to bring up while we're here is a book called The Bug Stops Here. The Bug Stops Here is a complete inventory of pests and weeds and non-toxic ways to kill them. You can fight all kinds of pests and weeds without killing yourself, your neighbors, the ocean. There's been ways for hundreds of years to fight every kind of bug that's going to bother you. This is a manual stolen from inside Dow. It shows regular work going on pumps that pumped pesticide waste from making pesticides into the ocean. Here they're called Dow Elanco. They normally change names every couple of years to avoid liability. Keeps people on the mist, but the Dow name is always there. It's Ivan Watkins Dow, Dow Elanco, Dow Agrosciences. Here's some pictures I'd like to share with you. This is from around the Dow plant in New Zealand. These are just flaxes and grasses around an outfall at the bottom of the chemical company. Grass is very unique. It has no hormones. This is one of the reasons you can spray Agent Orange all over the place, and the next day you've still got a green pasture, is because grass has no hormones, and Agent Orange and 2,4-D and all this kills anything with hormones, any other broadleaf plant. This is, here you can't see very well, but there's a sewer pipe from Dow going down there. This is below where the pipe comes out on the rocks. Not one bit of algae, not one crab, not one shrimp, not one bit of living thing. Now, not only do I say there is not one bit of living thing there, the New Zealand investigated the alleged agrochemical waste disposal sites around New Plymouth, and they found at that location no biota present. This is science for nothing fucking alive. Nothing at all. This is like someone scrubbed the sand and the rocks with chlorine and a brush. A short distance away, this is all the items you find alive. Each one of these creatures, and there's their Latin name for them. Namotu Beach, where there's an outfall. No algae and 3 tua. That's a mobile shellfish. Nothing alive. Hirakawa Stream, near my house. No biota present. Nothing alive. Again, the newspaper article before. Call to alter paua size of bag limits. Too small. A Taranaki paua left to a legal specimen. That's as big as they'll grow after you poison the shit out of your food chain. These are all the items you can find alive normally. And these are highly limited. All these should be much more so. I might add, in all of their ground radar things, the ground radar showed, like at 44 Rangataki Street, and it's consistent throughout, possible large buried objects. These are all the buried drums. This is under the whole neighborhood. We drug ground radar throughout people's front yards and backyards, everywhere you saw on the map with the hatched grids. Buried round objects. Now, why would the newspaper say no problem, and the council members all say they found no evidence of any dioxins? It's because they were all very wealthy people. They had been bought the same way you buy a prostitute or a girl, the same way you buy a little boy if you're a sick son of a bitch, the same way you buy people. They had turned for money and said the poor people of Paratutu, New Plymouth, and the Maori of New Zealand can just eat shit and die. That's what these people did for money. So if you know someone holding shares in Monsanto, you know a murderer. You know a chicken shit person who is murdering people. They haven't got the balls to do it with a gun in their face, but they'll take a few dollars more and they'll turn their back on humanity. And that's what's happening, and that has to stop. The act of shareholding while in office should be seen as a criminal offense. It's no different than participating in prostitution while elected on the pimp end. Went recently to the Maui News, 2010. Kids in Vietnam seriously birth defected. A measly, paltry 300 million should be paid out. Should be. It won't. But think about it. We dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I lived in Japan and speak good Japanese, and if it was dangerous to go to Hiroshima or Nagasaki, you wouldn't be allowed in there. And it isn't. Your Geiger counter is silent. It's not toxic. It's safe to go to Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Grow rice in your backyard and eat it. You're not going to die. You cannot go to South Vietnam. You cannot go to New Zealand without seriously risking your life. Now, folks, if there's a genetic transfer and a gene transfer to any myriad of 100 plants here on New Zealand, or any other sort of genetic transfer takes place on a plant or insect level with our GMO activities that we're allowing, we run the risk of having to vacate or evacuate this island. They are playing nuclear explosions, open-air nuclear explosions on a biological level. They have no way to recall anything that might transform in these cane fields. And all of this is a criminal act, because when you're exposed to these things without your knowledge, you're having your informed consent violated. Monsanto is quite well aware that they're violating your informed consent and the liabilities associated with. That's why they've gone to the great lengths to purchase all your elected officials, so they can shed blame. So we need to take current and strong action and forceful pressure consistently with the new council and anyone allowing Monsanto to continue their activities here. And I would point to Australia. North Queensland, Australia just banned the use of herbicides within any drainage of the Great Barrier Reef. Now, the Great Barrier Reef is about 700 times as much reef as Maui has, and we already know our reef's in serious trouble. We should be 700 times as careful with our tiny little bit of resources they're being with a massive amount of it. So it would not hurt us to farm organically, is all that is that at the end of the day, to stop using these deadly chemicals means people have to go back to work farming. You pay people instead of Mr. Rumsfeld and Mr. Cheney to poison everything in sight. And then, of course, that brings in the problem of injuries on the jobs and these insurance companies that have really poisoned everything as well in their own way. Regardless of what way we find forward, it has to be a less toxic way, because our kids are going to be paying the price already for our carelessness for the last 30 years, whether we admit to it or not. So I implore all of you to please put down the glyphosate, put down the Roundup, put down the 2,4,5-T, 2,4-D, or any other trichlorphenyl at all. Take it back, demand a refund, and they'll have no problem giving it to you. And let's follow Queensland's suit and stop selling these deadly chemicals, because there's people out there that will use them no matter what. There's just laziness and greed will persist if we allow it. I draw a parallel between the Quaaludes and the meth. In the early 80s, we had a problem with Quaaludes in the United States. Young girls getting drug raped and all this, and causing wrecks and idiot behavior, and we just banned the production of that ingredient. So we could do the same with meth too. Just ban the basic ingredient, and that's the end of that. Someone has a meth bush in their backyard. These are chemicals and by government-empowered chemical companies. They're easy to stop. You just need to get good and pissed off. So this is what happened in New Zealand, and they lead the world in cancer. This is 2020, your hindsight. You have availability. You see it right now. After I got deported from New Zealand and back here, I got sent a magazine, and aptly titled on age 50, after 12 years of fighting them. There's an article titled Gotcha. What that article says by Gotcha is, now the world knows. We were telling the truth all along. They know about the babies in jars, they know why they're there, they know the dumps, they know the whole story. We don't need Maori to feature in Investigate magazines as the top of a disaster story. And that's what's going to happen. So please, I implore you to fight Monsanto however you can. As a closing note, I'd ask you to look into the Veterans Forum held recently in Chicago, Illinois. It would seem that myself and other Vietnam veterans fighting for years for benefits and always consistently being denied were actually approved a long time ago. But people within Dow and Monsanto and agents in the VA set up a ghost system where Vietnam veterans and others were actually approved and their benefits have been paid into an insurance company or something behind the scenes, where veterans have been ripped off to the tune of $300 million a day. So these companies run amok with all of us. It's going to kill all of us if we don't do something. And that's what they're in to do. Monsanto has illegally weaponized the food chain against every single agreement and law the United States set down at the end of Hitler's World War II. So start acting like your lives depend on it, because they do. Thank you. Have a good evening. Have a good day.